the next speaker is going to talk about growth, and I believe we cannot be at a Stretch conference not talking about growth. And I am going to try to pronounce his name, so please wish me luck. He is Hendrik Haandrikman. The stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. The talks up till now, or at least the talks I have attended, have been very relaxing. This probably won't be, and I apologize beforehand. I'm going to talk to you today about continuous organizational transformation while you scale up, or in other words, the way I explain it to people that actually work at Bitrise is how to change everyone's job title every 6 months without them freaking out. Scaling means continuous reinvention. You're continuously reinventing the structures, the team, the roles that people fulfill in the company. But that amount of change can break companies, teams, and people. At the same time, if you do it well, it's the thing that leads to massive growth for both the company as well as the people in the company. A little bit about me. I'm Hendrik Haandrikman, but just use Rick. That probably works better for most people. I'm the Vice President of Growth at Bitrise. Bitrise is a Hungarian company, we consider ourselves one of the homegrown successes. We are a technology platform for app developers. We were spun off from another company a couple of years back. And the reason I joined Bitrise initially is because it is the first, and I think till date, the only Hungarian company to make it into Y Combinator. And I'm going to very shortly explain what Y Combinator is, because again, in the company, when I'm interviewing people and I tell people they should really be excited because we were in Y Combinator, people kind of just blank out. So it turns out that a lot of people actually don't know what Y Combinator is. Y Combinator is not but the Silicon Valley startup incubator. Whenever you get into the incubator, you move to Silicon Valley for 3 months. You work with the partners at Silicon Valley and alumni on getting to an MVP or finding some semblance of product market fit. And then you pitch to investors on demo day, and they shower you with money. Some graduates are Airbnb, Dropbox, Twitch, Reddit, Stripe, DoorDash. And what they do, and the thing that is most appealing about Bitrise being a YC company is that they guide companies throughout the life cycle of the company. So they don't stop at the 3 months you spend in Silicon Valley. Actually, afterwards, while you're executing and scaling, it is an invaluable source of support. And one of the most practical examples, and a thing we use regularly right now, is that it is a great way to find mentors for your people. So currently, Bitrise is, we're scaling. The thing they say about scaling companies is you 3x revenue, and then 2x a couple of times, and then you're a $1 billion company. We're roughly halfway there. We're 100 people now. And over 100,000 developers worldwide today use Bitrise. If you're not a mobile developer, a lot of people will not actually know who we are or what we do. But if you're a mobile developer, we're kind of hot shit, as they say. Active all over the world. We now have 4 offices. We're in Budapest, London, Boston, and San Francisco. Biggest user bases, for some reason, the US and Japan. And the motto that YC kind of instills in the companies that make it through the program is make something people want. And that's what we do. As a company, we make something people want. And then for me personally, before I was at Bitrise, what I actually did was make people want something, which is different. So before this, I kind of did the scaling journey at like a nameless mobile gaming company. And what you do there is you acquire, monetize, retain, and then monetize some more users. It's very bad for your karma because you're essentially selling people air. At the same time, making that journey and the crazy fast speed at which that happens prepares you for this kind of situation quite well. Before I was in that gaming company, I had some experience with continuous change. I have, I think, 10 different majors. When people ask me what all of them are, I tend to leave out 4 or 5. What they are not important. Bunch of different scattered stuff. Okay, so scale-ups, mobile gaming. How is any of this going to be relevant? Hopefully, the lessons we learned while we were scaling and evolving the structures, the processes, and the people to support that have some transference. Like, they're going to be somewhat applicable to most companies. We made a shit ton of mistakes along the way, and hopefully, by paying very close attention, you will not make the same mistakes. So regardless of what type of company you're exactly in right now, it should help you create some more effective processes to respond better to external influences that drive change and to empower and grow your people. Also important, what you definitely won't get is tricks to get to product market fit, because I don't have them, or a how to become a scale-up, because again, I don't have them, they just hired me. What you should get is the learnings from being a scale-up and some insights into building the org. To grow means to change. What does that mean? So external and internal pressures that impact your organization force continuous changes in the structures and the processes and the people that kind of make up that organization. And those external pressures are stuff like new types of customers, new types of competitors, change in external factors like the political landscape, the technological landscape, and internal pressures like the need for administrative processes that you didn't really need when you were just 10 people in an attic, people challenges, like more people, more challenges, and performance challenges. You can kind of map that out like this. So you have external and internal pressures kind of driving continuous change in your company. When you're a scale-up, you face 10 times those pressures. The challenge for a company in that phase is that environment where continuously changing the processes and the structures and the people, that environment isn't actually all that common, right? So a couple of decades ago, it wasn't that common for a company to go from 10 to 100 to 1,000 people in 2 years. And even today, it's the exception, it's not the rule. So most people haven't experienced it. Schools don't actually teach their people how to handle it. And there are tons of very, very successful people out there that have been doing amazing work for decades and haven't ever encountered this kind of situation. At at the same time, because it's such a rare environment, you cannot really hire people exclusively that have been through that journey, because that would dramatically reduce your access to talent. And even when you do manage to attract those people, if you're not very, very, very careful, the pressure cooker that this kind of environment creates is very, very likely to break people, right? And then they're gone, and then you're back to square one. And the challenge, or the art, is to preserve some semblance of order amid change, and to preserve some change amid order. What this means is that every single process, every single structure, every single role in the company is actually open to continuous reevaluation. Like, things can and will change always. What we do is we focus on the output and impact. We hire and coach people through this process of change, and we hire people that inspire. So I'm going to take a step back and really rapidly try and get you through what exactly a ScaleUp is. Because when I sent out my first press release in Hungary, I came to the conclusion that there is no word in Hungarian for ScaleUp, which was very confusing for me. Okay, so you have a startup, which is where you're kind of trying to find a repeatable and scalable business model. You have the ScaleUp, which is where you found that business model and you're exponentially growing and you're developing your market. And you have scalers, which is where you've developed this market, but you want to keep that leadership position and squeeze out some more growth. Early on in that phase, you still see a lot of product pivots. It's an important qualifier, product pivots, where in the customer discovery phase, you stumble upon some ideas. You go through customer validation. Those ideas will prove wrong. You pivot, and you kind of change your product accordingly. Most of those pivots happen in the startup phase. Famous stories are like Twitch, which started like, I think, live streaming a guy's apartment. Twitter, which was a podcasting network. Slack was a gaming company. And YouTube was actually a dating platform. So a lot of pivots happen in that startup phase, and that's actually where you want them to happen. They will occasionally happen later. Generally, the scaling process, or the stage where we're in right now, or the stage people call a scale-up, will happen after finding product market fit, and will happen after any major product pivots. Also, interesting fact that the pivot makes for a very sexy story. At the same time, 90% of companies actually do not deviate from their original product vision after they find that product market fit. What people do pivot on, and actually one of the things that kind of drives that change in the organization, is pivoting by finding new partners, new customers, new activities, resources, channels, cost, and revenue streams. This is really what scaling is. And that stage, where you have that initial product market fit and you're rapidly pivoting through a shit ton of other stuff, is what gives you companies like Uber, Lime, and WeWork. If you're into tech or the tech press at all, these companies have some similarities. They're what we call blitzscalers. And blitzscalers are companies that suddenly or take a sudden all-out effort to grow. And blitzscalers differentiate by prioritizing speed over efficiency. That also means that a lot of the normal rules of doing business are not applicable. So all that careful planning you do, all the cautious investment, solving every single problem that is thrown your way, that kind of goes out of the window. And what you do is you have rapid guesstimates, you do inefficient investment, and you let the small fires burn. And a good and famous example of this is PayPal, who for, I think, the first 6 months just did not have customer support. If you reached out to PayPal and you sent them an email, it just bounced. If you tried to call them, nothing happened. They were very, very aware, but it was a small fire that they let burn. Blitzscaling, book by Reid Hoffman, actually one of the founders of PayPal and one of the founders of LinkedIn. Very good book. Read it, and then ignore roughly 2/3 of it. Because the main takeaways, or some of the things that the companies I just mentioned have in common, is that, well, sometimes you hire people that aren't actually right because you need to scale. Sometimes you tolerate bad management because you need to scale. Sometimes you ignore customers, like you don't pick up the phone, you don't answer the email because you need to scale. And sometimes, and very often, you raise too much money because you need to scale. And then sometimes what happens is this. This is the WeWork story. You'll see a sudden but dramatic drop at the end there. So blitzscaling has some risks. For investors, it's actually great, because for an investor, investing in a blitzscaling company is a huge bet. Like, you pump tons and tons of money into these blitzscalers, but you do that because the market opportunity is so big that if you make 3 of these bets and 1 makes it, you're still good. So for investors, blitzscaling in the right conditions, very, very smart strategy. You just don't want to work in one of those companies because, well, the chances are 2 out of 3 that you're going to do this. So we do it slightly different. So what we do, and anybody that spends any amount of time in our office will have seen this little drawing, because it pops up everywhere. So we are there, we want to be there, and we came from there. And we got to where we are now by continuously reinventing how we function as an organization. And in this context, that means evolving the structures, the relationships, the people, and the culture, actually, to face those kind of pressures I just talked about. And then, ideally, what you do is you make a series of hops all the way to the point where you want to be. And then if you kind of compare that to how blitzscaling works, blitzscaling tries to take a shortcut. And that shortcut is a huge gamble. If it pays off massively. If it doesn't pay off, then, well, yeah, you're screwed. Each of these hops represents a version of the organization that is so different that when you kind of look back, it's unrecognizable. And if you're in a scaling company, you will recognize this. If you're in a company that went from 10 to 100 to 500 to 1,000 people, if you look back 6 months during that journey, at any time, the company you see 6 months ago is going to be a different company. So like most models, it is not fully accurate, but it helps turn something kind of vague and intimidating in something that most people will actually understand. One of the downsides is it's not super useful as a planning tool for these iterations. Right, you can't really say, well, 2 hops from now, this is what the company will probably look like, so we need to start building X, Y, and Z structures. Because it's like a gradual process, right? It's like a kid growing up, where from one day to another, they kind of look the same, but then if you haven't seen them for 2 years, they're suddenly twice as tall. But it allows you to understand the journey and the big picture. So every single person in the company can kind of look at this graph and understand, well, 6 months ago, where and what were we? 12 months ago, where and what were we? So we choose iterative and deliberate change over time versus the Blitzscaling model. We choose that because it's, well, less risky. It's more efficient because you actually make decisions based on your environment, and you're way better able to respond to those pressures I was talking about. Because one of the downsides, one of the other downsides in blitzscaling is that if you go all in and build the company you think you need 3 years down the line today, and that environment changes, you've lost a ton of agility. So what we do is we prioritize immediate impact. So whenever we kind of think about how the company works together, or what those processes look like, what the roles people fulfill look like, we prioritize for immediate impact and agility with like a side eye on the next permutation. Because you can kind of envision the type of company you need to be 6 months down the line. And one of the things to keep in mind is that it's very, very tempting to try and look ahead multiple hops. But as hops increase, or as time increases, uncertainty increases as well. So at some point, you're really just guessing. Okay, so what does that actually look like? Currently, that means that for every process or team, you kind of minimize the number of stakeholders involved in decisions, minimize the dependencies, you optimize groups to have some shared context where necessary, you empower those groups to make decisions for themselves and try to make them first principle thinkers. I will get back to that later. And you have goals, metrics, and KPIs because you actually want to know if what you're doing makes sense. And if you kind of map that out, then minimizing the number of stakeholders involved in decisions and minimizing outside dependencies are what allows you to execute fast, right? Because there's not a lot of discussion. And those other points help keep the organization agile and able to respond to those changes. This is the growth organization in Bitrise. When I show people this, they're always kind of confused. But that's because we kind of built this for this very specific hop, fully realizing that it's not scalable, fully realizing that a year from now, this thing is going to break down dramatically, but by then, we will actually be in a second hop and we'll have evolved and changed most of this. So what you'll see here is that these segment teams are built to share context. Share context, they're cross-functional teams where there are not a ton of outside dependencies, where we create first principle thinkers. So the segment teams are built around audiences and around dependencies, so that the product marketing team has a mission. That mission is to drive adoption and awareness of the product. So these are product people. They really understand the product. They work very closely together with product. The mission is what dictates the task. And we empower them to find the best solution to actually reach that mission. DevRel similarly talks about Bitrise as a community. works with developers in community mode, has a very specific mission, has a ton of context around Bitrise as a community, enterprise marketing, kind of the same with the sales process. At the same time, everybody in this team, in this organization, knows that half a year from now, a year from now, the organization will probably look like this. Because, again, this is not scalable. This is 15 people now, I think. With 30 people or 10 people in one of these segment teams, it kind of just breaks down. There are too many people in the room. I think it's Amazon that has this rule where if you build a team, they need to be able to split a pizza in the meeting. And at some point, we will pass that point. So it will look different. And that's fine. That's fine, because you do things that don't scale. We know that we're not entirely sure of what the organization will look at that point, and something that's kind of critical, and one of the things that helps ensure that people don't feel overwhelmed or feel that the ground is continuously shifting under their feet, is that everybody in the team knows this. Like, they know that we're very purposefully doing things that don't scale. And they also know that we're very purposefully not planning too far ahead because things will change. Currently, we're getting increasingly documented, increasingly defined, and we're slowly but surely sacrificing some agility in favor of the ability to actually improve on processes. We do that because of this. If you kind of plot out performance over time in the early phases of the company where everything is still kind of chaotic, out of chaos sometimes magic happens, right? You stumble upon something that works, performance shoot up, you do better, you find new customers, you make more money. But by taking these little pauses in between, where you kind of standardize and document and understand, you can be more deliberate about improvement. Because we have an increasing understanding of what the impact of change actually is. Okay, so change. Talked a lot about change. Actually, let's talk about the people for a bit. So the team structures regularly change. Processes and roles regularly change. At the start, I made the joke that people's titles change every 6 months. They really do. So how do we make sure that people don't break in that kind of environment? And that starts with hiring. And this is actually where the chart becomes very handy again. So when we hire people in operational roles, we hire people for this version of the company. We hire somebody that can come in and do the job, right? We hire somebody that can come in and do the job, but at the same time has the ability to understand why they're doing the job, do this first principle thinking, where they are not married to executing the task as is today, but they will change and evolve as the environment dictates. What we don't hire is people that are clearly ill at ease with change, which actually a lot of people. Feedback culture, which is kind of key to driving these kinds of changes, and people that are unable or unwilling to learn from mistakes. And one question that I ask in every single interview always is, okay, so what's the biggest mistake you've ever made in your professional life? And if people do not have an answer, they're like immediately disqualified because we all fucked up, right? At some point, we all messed up quite dramatically, and then hopefully what happened is that we learned something, and those are the type of people you kind of want to filter for in this stage. In the more strategic roles, we actually take that side eye that we use to kind of look at the next version or the next permutation of the company, and we try to identify some of the gaps there. So for the stuff we need to do 6 months down the line, what do we really need to know? What do we need to be great at? And are we not able to learn fast enough? And do we not have in-house? Like, you kind of hire the people that, in the Jerry Maguire quote, like, complete us. So you hire for those knowledge gaps with the realization that sometimes that means that for the immediate role, they might lack a little experience or they might lack a little insight, but usually because you're all very, very familiar with the context, that immediate role is usually a given. Like, it's a list of things we need that we know that need to be done, right? And you can kind of just hand those over. So that's what you look for. What you don't want to do, and this is where we've made some mistakes, and it's a very tempting trap to fall into, is to hire people for leadership or strategic roles that have done what you're looking to do at a massive, massive scale, but don't understand the journey or don't understand the necessity of the journey. So the people that take, well, again, maybe sometimes decades of experience running X at a massive, massive company and try to apply those rules in the current version of the company, that always kind of breaks down. Just a quick explainer on how we define first principle thinking. So, like, it's like a Greek philosophy thing, right? Aristotle defined it as the first basis from which a thing is known. We kind of use it to teach people to care about the why and the what, not necessarily the how. So if I take the growth team again, if I'm in the product marketing team, what I care about is making people use and understand Bitrise. How I do that is kind of irrelevant as long as I really, really care that it happens and I have the ability and the support to execute the tasks that are necessary to make that happen. For the company as a whole, one of those first principles is make something people want. And a good example of how we, as a company, ensure to ensure that that's always true, that we're always making something people want, is that we do not gate access to customers at all. So everybody in the company can pick up a phone, type an email, reach out in chat to any customer they want at any time to just like find out what they're thinking. And what you'll see here is actually a cross-functional team that went to Singapore to just meet customers there. And we do this continuously. So year-round, we have teams that compromise really everybody in the company, travel to faraway places, and meet mobile developers. And that's how we get people to think about making something people want before anything else, right? First principle thinking. It's very important. Okay, so how you kind of support all of that is by having great people teams. Again, something we learned along the way is the massive, massive import of the recruitment process, the HR, the willingness to continuously improve on those processes, and the ability to kind of assess qualities. We have a support structure in place, so even after people are hired, we have continuous feedback, one-on-ones, continuous learning. We do 360 reviews where everybody can kind of give feedback to everybody as long as it's constructive. We have learning plans to help people change. And that, for me as a people leader in this in this case, that means me too, right? You will have noticed that I can be a bit hyperactive or all over the place. That's regular feedback. That's something I'm actually hard at work at. Some good examples of what happens then is in our product marketing team specifically, for example, we had a content writer. We found that what would be more impactful in the next permutation of the organization would be a product marketer. What this person did was they took the opportunity and they stated, well, I'm a very senior content writer, but I'm a very junior product marketer. I'm going to work on getting there. And we as a company support that. One of our digital marketers, you actually saw her a couple of slides back, spoke to 400 developers at a mobile conference in Singapore. That's not part of the job description. And in a lot of organizations, or for a lot of people, that's actually quite intimidating or scary. And hopefully, we've created a culture where people see it as an opportunity, which it is. Same thing is like one of our content writers is one of the foremost experts on mobile DevOps at this point, and probably the most senior developer relations person in the country at this moment used to be a content writer for us. So people are continuously changing. Then a couple of points on culture. So all of this only works if the culture kind of supports it. Culture eats process for breakfast, something like that. At the same time, culture needs to be able to continuously evolve and change, but on some grounding principles. So the culture needs to be blameless, the culture needs to be empowering, like give people, some power. Celebrate learning, celebrate wins, solve problems, and collaborate. Those are like the grounding principles. And then you create a living culture around those principles. Because honestly, again, if you look back 6 months, or you look back 12 months, or you look back 18 months, that culture, the same as all the other things, has changed quite dramatically. And that culture is made by people. And that's why we do these trips where everybody together goes, well, in this case, to Tokyo. It's why you celebrate the small things. It's why you collaborate, in this case, on rowing a boat. And that's why, as you scale the company and you have more nationalities and people working remotely, we take these moments to come together and actually build the culture. Cool. So, quick recap. Build the company culture and team you need for today, but keep an eye on tomorrow and kind of try to ignore what comes much further out than that. Do things that don't scale. Understand and commit to the need for continuous change, learning, and improvement. Acknowledge the need to continuously re-examine, reevaluate, and restructure. Instill the culture of learning, empowerment, and agility. Hire the right people, embolden and empower those people, and help them flourish in the pressure cooker that this process is, and then create diamonds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. Okay, so we have a lot of questions up on Slido. We're going to take them in order of their rating. Well, first of all, what is your company doing exactly?
Cool. Do people know Zapier?
Show of hands?
It's like Zapier for mobile development. So we kind of automate app development processes by offering you Lego blocks to kind of build those processes together. And then you kick them off automatically. If you're a mobile developer, again, it's very exciting.
Okay. How do structural changes look like at Bitrise, scaling from 30 to 100 people? So your personal experience with the company.
So I'm a big fan of having like a flat organization with not too many management layers where people can kind of just get the job done without a ton of bureaucracy. Increasingly, we're hiring that middle layer. Like, you cannot directly manage 20 people. So it's a physical impossibility. So more middle management, more outside expertise because you're just facing challenges that you never faced before. So I think this week we had somebody start for employer branding. Well, if you're a 30-person company, who cares about employer branding? But at this point, we kind of really need to care. So you hire some outside expertise. So outside expertise, leadership, and then actually also the organizational parts that support all of that. And that's kind of where HR and recruitment comes in, right? You don't need a recruitment team if you're 10 people. You don't need HR if you're 10 people because you're all kind of in a small room and you talk it out over that one pizza you share. And increasingly, those organizations are actually, or those parts of the organization are actually what make the company tick.
Okay, great. How do you personally, create psychological safety or any kind of safety and stability for your employees, touching on an earlier talk we had?
I hope that I'm very open to criticism and transparent about what I don't know, right? We're in it together, right? Sometimes I just admit I don't know. Somebody comes to me with a challenge, and if I can tell them I don't know, they feel comfortable telling me that I don't know, that they don't know, right? So you try to create that environment where it's okay to fail as long as you're upfront about it, as long as you learn something from it, as long as the organization becomes better because of it.
So transparency and accountability. Okay. What is the goal of a scale-up? So it seems like a few people here took away the message that it's primarily about making money at any cost. Is that, can you speak to that?
Not at any cost, right? Not at any cost. There are some lines. Well, like, what is the purpose of a company? At the end of the day, the purpose of a company is to make money. And ideally, again, being somebody that came from gaming, you find a company that makes money by doing something that people want, right? For a lot of our sales folks, it's a bit of a culture shock. Like, one of the first things I tell them is, don't sell people things. Like, don't sell people things. Solve their problems, and then they will give us money. And that is definitely not true for every scale-up, but that's how we approach it, right? We want to make mobile development less sucky.
Okay, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. How do you measure if someone is capable of accepting change?
So I think early on, like a couple of versions of a company ago, I just got lucky with hiring some of the right people. Increasingly, the recruitment process actually supports all of that. So again, like, the recruitment team is amazing. They, by now, have a good ability to actually assess this. I have some questions that I will usually ask that help me assess this. And then the next step in the process is like an assessment day where we take a couple of these characteristics or qualities we're looking for, and then we put a candidate into a room with somebody in the organization we know that can assess that quality or that characteristic. And then when somebody comes in for that final stage of the interview process, they'll have 4 or 5 interviews with people that we know can really assess these different qualities and characteristics we're looking for.
Okay. Good question. What is your biggest takeaway or the most important thing you learned from being a people manager at Bitrise, let's say from the last year? So, top thing.
Well, that's not actually all that difficult. So, I come from like a very data-driven environment, right? If you're, again, in gaming, it is really all about making as much money as fast as possible. So that's kind of what you optimize the team for. You're looking for really hard skills, people that know the tricks. And increasingly, the performance of the team kind of leans on these people processes, getting people to learn, getting people to feel safe. So when I first started doing one-on-ones, I didn't really even do one-on-ones before I was at Bitrise. When I first started doing one-on-ones, they were very performance-driven, and increasingly they're about like making people feel safe and helping people get ready for those next steps. And that's better. so that's what I learned, I hope.
Okay, thank you. The next point's not really a question, it's more of a feedback. Guys, don't forget to rate the talks and give your feedback. It's really important for everybody. Going over that, it's, is Bitrise at the maturity level based on Jürgen Appello's lecture, our first talk, when it should scale up, or is it a little bit early? What do you think about that?
I wasn't here for the first talk, but if you look at a ScaleUp as a company that has found their market, has found product market fit, so something that kind of fulfills a need in that market, and you can scale up responsibly, then I believe that we are there.
Okay, great. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Rick. We have here a, here a souvenir. Thank you.